a minute. Right. Good morning, friends. This morning we have an interesting talk by our friend Valerie Davey, whom I have known for a few years. She has been a member of the Labour Party for a considerably long time. I don't know if she has discussions of political type of things along with her husband, who is here as well, but he shakes his head, so no. But let me introduce you to Valerie Davey. Valerie, whenever you're ready.
That's very kind of you, Ray. I'd like to start, in fact, with 3 thank yous. Thank you for this group. Throughout the pandemic, it's been a regular feature in our diary, and we've appreciated, and I say we, because quite often I've sat in on earlier meetings, so thank you very much for organising them. Secondly, thank you for inviting me. I know that amongst your membership, you've got people who've been members of the Labour Party probably as long or longer than me, who could equally have done this role that you're in your programme of speaking from a Labour Party perspective. And thirdly, a thank you because it's given me the challenge of just reviewing over 50 years within the Labour Party, how I came to be there and what it's meant to me. And that's been quite a useful journey. And I am going to give you a personal journey. I'm not going to have a lot of documents. I'm not going to have a lot of policy statements. I'd just like to take you through my journey into and through the Labour Party. And I've done it by choosing 5 objects. I've got a book, I've got a badge, a membership card, a photo and a rosette. And those 5 things I discovered really, as it were, take me through how I've come here and what I've been doing. So first of all, the book. And you might be a bit surprised that it's called Tanzanian Citizen. And it's dated 1966. And that's the year that Graham and I got married and went out to teach in Tanzania. And that book I came across again recently in preparation for this and realised just how much it had influenced me, because I was teaching from this book. This was one of the textbooks in the boys' secondary school that we were teaching in, and I hadn't realised just how much President Nyerere's ujamaa, his policy of corporateness, his policy of togetherness and sharing like a family had influenced me. And opening it and looking again more at the pictures, I came across the picture which was the start of Tanganyika, as it started out in 1961, and a flag was put on the top of Kilimanjaro to mark the occasion. And the quote underneath reads, and this is where I mentioned to others earlier on, that I need to change my glasses, but Nyerere said at the time, "We, the people of Tanganyika, would like to light a candle and put it on the top of Mount Kilimanjaro to shine beyond our borders, giving hope where there's despair, love where there's hate, and dignity where there was only humiliation." Now that generates this book, and it was, I realise now, a very good influence on me. And so you might be saying to yourself, well, had she got any politics before then? And I have to admit to you, very little. To use a Quaker term, I'm a birthright Methodist. I've been brought up, both my parents Methodist, both their parents, both my sets of grandparents, all belonged to Springfield Methodist Church in downtown Wolverhampton. And this was an area of tiny red brick houses. You stepped from the pavement straight into the front room, no halls, no bathroom, an outside loo, very small and large numbers of people in them. My mother was born the 6th of 9 children, but by the time she was 10, she was the 5th of 5. Things happened dramatically in those small houses. There were tragedies, there were disappointments, and you'd have thought that that Methodist family and that background would nurture socialism, would nurture the Labour Party. You know, does the Labour Party owe more to Methodism than Marxism? But no, my hard-working parents moved out of that area. I was born in Surrey, and they remained, and we all remained, absolutely constant Methodists with a huge social concern. The activities of the family, the giving, the sharing, the community activity, but not politics. And in fact, until well after I left school, both my parents voted Tory. Hard work and do it for yourself. Hard work and get on there. And we can think, I'm afraid, of another person who was nurtured by the Methodists and became a strong Tory leader. So it's not necessarily the case that that background inevitably gave you that political involvement. It certainly didn't for me. Very socially concerned. I can remember arguing passionately at school in favour of the abolition of capital punishment. You know, things like that were really important, but not politics. It didn't somehow link. And the first jolt I got, I went to university, I joined the Student Christian Movement, which is where I met Graham. And those things were all very valuable and important. But the first real jolt I got was teaching, and I'd gone back to Wolverhampton by then. And the 1964 election came, and I looked at my ballot paper, and the Tory candidate was Enoch Powell. And I can remember just spoiling my ballot. I did vote. I had to vote. That was the first time I could vote. And don't forget, you had to be 21 at that stage in order to vote. So I simply invalidated my ballot paper, put it in, and then moved on. Got married, went to Tanzania. And there, what sunk in rather more quickly than the civics lesson was the fact that we realised that new country, we went in 66, Tanzania, the joining of Zanzibar and Tanganyika had happened in 64, that country was being exploited. And you could feel it almost. You know, the 5-year plan which they'd built up for the coming years depended on particularly sisal and coffee. Well, we didn't need sisal anymore, thank you very much. We were going to use nylon, so sisal fell by the wayside. And the thing which still sticks and stuck with me was Libreri going to a village and where they needed a health clinic. And he told the people there, look, if you produce twice as much coffee next year as you've produced this, there'll be enough money for a health clinic. And you know what happened? They produced twice as much, and they got exactly the same or less for it on the market the following year, because the coffee market was controlled. And they didn't have any add-on value. They weren't able to do any of the processing or the bottling, anything else with it. They simply sent bags of coffee across, and the price on the world market was controlled. And that exploitation by people who so say, well, they had power, didn't they? They had power, they had, so say, better education, well, so say. We were teaching young people, boys' school, they came into that school not bilingual, but trilingual. They've got a mother tongue, they've got Swahili as their lingua franca, and all the education was in English. And if they wanted to do medicine and go to Russia, they learned Russian. I mean, just amazing people. And they were being exploited. And we came home from Tanzania, and we obviously got involved in Oxfam and all the other world development movements, that kind of thing. And then some friends called by, also in the Oxfam group. Why don't you join the Labour Party? Well, as you heard earlier, Graham's background had been partly in the Labour Party, and it seemed the natural thing to do. So we joined. And I got involved because I was with a small family and going to nursery school. I could see the huge value of nursery education. And that's where I met Elizabeth Lloyd, Miss Lloyd, who was head teacher of St. Philip's Marsh Nursery at that time. And so gradually things moved on. And then I was sitting in a Labour Party meeting, this was about 1978, I guess, and someone next to me said, we got to it used to be called posts and panels, panels and posts. And we got to that point, and somebody next to me, I can see him now, said, Val, why don't you put your name up? There's a Bristol City Council election coming up. You'd be a good candidate, you know. And I said, me? And he said, oh, go on, I'll put your name forward. It doesn't mean that you'll get elected or anything like that, but I'll put your name forward. And so he did. And that's where I first met Jenny, because Jenny Smith and I and George Easton stood for Stockwood for the City Council in the 79 election. And we didn't win, but my goodness, we improved the vote. And I was quite grateful in a way I didn't win, because 2 years later, I was asked to stand for Knoll for Avon County Council. And I was elected. And in 1985, some of you will remember that Avon, which had been Tory controlled since its creation in 74, had a Labour majority of 2. And that was a really amazing time. And although it was the Thatcher era, although the money was being cut, there were certain things we could do with that majority. And when people say to me, well, you know, idealism, there are things you have to opt out of and come back from. Yes, but actual power is impressively important. And one of the early things we did, for example, and one I think that I remember so much, I was on the education committee, that was my natural leaning, having been a teacher and with small children at school. We abolished corporal punishment in schools, just like that. And I can remember going into a school, and they said, oh, you've come to consult. And I said, no, we'll consult with you about how your new policy in schools will be affected, but we've made that decision. And that was just absolutely marvellous. And we went on to do other things. I can remember, I think it was the first Hiroshima Day, we passed a resolution in the full council saying that it was futile spending money in preparation for nuclear war. And we had to hassle with the government over that, and we had a long period of difficulty, but things could happen. And even later on, we lost our majority in 85. We were a hung council after that. But my word, there were things we could do. And Jenny spoke to you about the teaching, about the support rather for Romany families, for travellers' children in different ways. And we set up ATEG, which was the Avon Travellers Education Group. And that was with Liberal Democrat support. So in a hung council, other things happened. And we made progress in certain areas. We certainly diverted money into education and healthcare. We weren't a health authority, but supportive work we could do. And that was amazing. But the next object I've got, and I want to bring to your attention, is a badge. We worked, of course, very closely with the trade unions on Avon. We had an amazing group on the Avon group. We had such a range of people. We had a former docker. We had someone who owned a newsagent shop. We had teachers, obviously. We had academics. We had an engine driver. We had a former MP, a hairdresser, a whole range of people. And we worked together very hard, especially when it was a hung council. But one of the trade union, one of the NUT trade unions said, are you coming to Tolpuddle this year, Val? A small badge, you won't be able to see it, but it's 1984, and it's the 150th anniversary of the Tolpuddle martyrs. And going on that march and being there just opened up something else. I think, you know, we always say you have to have heart and mind in politics. And this was my heart experience, because I soon realised that George Lovelace, the leader of the 6 martyrs, I'm not going to go through that, you know the story of the martyrs, but 4 out of 6 of them were Methodists. 4 out of 6 of them had come from my background with that deep faith and commitment to the world. And George Lovelace, with this huge dignity of purpose, able to speak as a former local preacher, which I'd been as well, I was as well. the dignity of what he was saying, the way in which he was saying it. And to begin with, that was all that impressed me. I just felt emotionally involved. And then I realised that had it not been for what happened afterwards, for the collaboration of people, for the protests, for the marches, for the petitions, over 18 months, it didn't happen suddenly, those men would have been forgotten. They'd have been left in Australia and in Tasmania. They wouldn't have got home without the collaboration of the trade unions who supported their families, who petitioned the Home Secretary, John Russell. And to begin with, he gave them a compromise. He said, OK, we'll leave the ringleaders there. The others can come home when they've served. And they said, no, that's not good enough. And it took them 18 months to get a free pardon for all of them to bring them back. And I suddenly realised again, these moments, you realise, got to be there, got to do it with other people. This doesn't happen just by inspirational leaders. It needs collaboration. It needs work together. It needs cooperation. And so moving on from there, and let me just mention another Quaker who was very influential in Avon days. Do you remember Chloe Goodchild? Chloe Goodchild, January 1992, left her job as a teacher and with money from the Roundtree Trust, 3 of them set up the Avon Peace Education Group. And that education policy of peace permeated our schools because we were able to take it on. And it didn't last, but my goodness, the impact, you don't know. Again, these are seeds being sown. And life got more difficult in Avon. We were cut back, and eventually, of course, we were abolished. So after that, I was thinking, where do I go? What do I do from here? And it's then that I have to bring up membership card, because this membership card, and it isn't my first membership card because it's got Blair's picture on it. And in those years after he was selected as leader, when Blair became leader, it was the death, sadly, of John Smith, which brought Blair as leader. He took a long time rewriting Clause 4. And some of you will know that the old Clause 4 started with the famous words, to secure for the workers by hand or brain, the full fruits of their industry and the most equitable distribution thereof, etc., etc., etc. 2 years later, and this was confirmed in the Easter Conference of 1995, we have on the back of our membership card now, the new Clause 4. And the new Clause 4 said that, and this is all the policy statements I'm going to give you this morning, because everything stems from this. So just let me read what's on the back of every membership card now. The Labour Party is a democratic socialist party. It believes that by the strength of our common endeavour, we achieve more than we achieve alone, so as to create for each of us the means to realise our true potential, and for all of us a community in which power, wealth and opportunity are in the hands of the many, in which power, wealth and opportunity are in the hands of the many, not the few, where the rights we enjoy reflect the duties we owe, and where we live together freely in a spirit of solidarity, tolerance and respect. Now that's the basis of everything else that stems from it. And obviously we have emphasised health and education, dignity at work, a whole range of things which stem from that and which we've worked at from that. And again, people said to me, well, all right, Avon's gone, why don't you stand for Parliament, Val? Me? No, why me? And they said, oh, go on. There's Bristol West just here. You know a bit about Bristol West, and why don't you? And this is again where I came with Jenny, and we were putting forward, and I praised the Labour Party for it. We weren't able to maintain it. We were challenged in law, but we started having women-only selections at that election. Bristol West didn't go for women's only selection. We weren't one of those that was doing it, but Bristol West itself selected 3 women for its shortlist, and I was one of them. Jenny was another, and Mary Southcott was the 3rd. And all of us could have done that job, there's no doubt. All of us, in very different ways, could have done that job. I can see Angela smiling, got a background in some of this. So this is something where, again, people had said to me, why don't you? I was the one who happened to be selected, and this amazing campaign that went forward, this collaborative work, we, the people, the Labour Party in Bristol West, worked extremely hard. We weren't given priority, we were a standalone constituency, but we got help. We got help from the other Labour candidates, we got help from regional office, and we were moving forward. But I want to say one more thing about this card, because about this time, before I was selected, you'll be glad to hear, I decided that I couldn't be a member of the Labour Party anymore. So I picked up my Saturday Guardian one day, and our leader was sending his son to the Oratory, to a grant-maintained school in London. I've been working against grant-maintained schools. I've been working so hard to ensure that we kept local control of schools, that we had our LEAs, that we had. So I went round the corner where Graham Manuel, our regional officer, happened to live, and I gave him back my card, and I said, I'm not standing for this. I can't possibly be a member of the Labour Party. And he sat me down, fortunately, calmed me down and said, you do realise that this future Prime Minister, and I think he did call him the future Prime Minister, will be the first Prime Minister who hasn't sent his son to an independent school. And although this isn't what you like, it's better than some. And I thought, And then he said, the clincher, he said, so you're opting out. Now that was the other name we'd given to these schools. They were opting out schools. And that lesson for me was either you stick with it, you can't have your own party, which believes everything you believe and where everybody in it is perfect. There has to be compromise, and there has to be a recognition that other people will be different. And how far do you stay with it and argue your corner, and how far do you leave it? And it took me a little while, but I did leave it. I left Graham. I didn't leave the party. I left Graham Manuel, and I thought, no, I can't opt out. I can't leave something where I believe so profoundly. Thanks to George Lovelace, thanks to Nireri, thanks to the people I'd met in the party, on Avon, in the trade union movement, in all those other things, which were part now for me of the Labour movement, of the Labour family. And I had to see what I could do to represent it to the best of my ability. And so that was what I said in the selection meetings. I told them a bit, as I've told you, about my background. I can remember being challenged, and I think Graham knows this, but I can remember being challenged and saying, well, we've got a lot of Greens around here, what do you know about them? And I said, well, I'm married to one, so that's where we are, you know. And we went from there, and as I say, you know what the history is after that. We won in Bristol West. It was an amazing time going up to Parliament. Quite a lot of it I knew in terms of politics. That wasn't the difficult side. I knew about holding surgeries. I knew about individual concerns. I knew about sharing in a group. But when I got there, one thing I must tell you, I didn't know it at the time, but I had one of the best websites in Westminster. And that wasn't because of me, I can assure you. I'm struggling still. But I had the support of Bristol West members in every way possible. I knew that if it came to policy issues, there were people there who I could share it with. I knew that in setting up my website, in setting up and having the equipment and all that, I'd have people to help me. And they set it up so well that to begin with, my office couldn't get in. It was so well encrypted, even we couldn't get into it. But I went to Westminster not realising that two things shook me. One, that you had to set up a small business. Every MP is running a small business. You're setting up an office, you're paying the rent, you're setting up the equipment, you're employing staff. And that took me a little while to sort out, but again, with help, it was done. And some remarkable people came on board. And secondly, that government is not like a local council. The government is the cabinet. And the rest of people, whether it's a huge majority of backbenchers, are in the Commons and in the Lords, influencing, you hope, and moving. But there is this government. And finding your way through that and finding your way to make a valuable contribution was not easy. And also finding how to balance being a Bristol West MP and being here and being a Westminster MP was quite difficult. And in the end, I was able to say to people, look, I'm not a social worker. I'm not a teacher anymore. I'm not this, that, and the other. The only thing I can do, because I've got MP after my name, is vote in Parliament. That's the only thing I can do that's different from everything else. But of course, I was having to be all these other things locally, but with huge support. So I got there, I found my feet, and I was able to contribute. First of all, as a member of the Education Select Committee. And I think the one thing there that I made my individual contribution for especially was education maintenance allowances. Obviously, the government was set to spend huge amounts on education, on health, but within that education bracket, the fact that 16 to 18-year-olds needed that extra support was something I'd been well aware of. And so education maintenance allowances for 16 to 18-year-olds. And of course, with my background with Elizabeth Lloyd and others, a huge emphasis on nursery education as well. And so the image I want to bring you from those days, and we may well talk about things later on that happened there at that time, is a photograph. And I've chosen it, A, because it's big and you'll be able to see it. I hope you will. Have I got that right? Yes. It's one of three children. And the second of them is standing outside number 10 Downing Street. And the reason I want to show you this is because A, it's a huge symbol for me of what I was trying to do, of trying to bring Bristol and Westminster together, but also of trying to be, as I said in my maiden speech, that bridge, just because the icon of Bristol West was the suspension bridge. So the bridge between, in the constituency, in Bristol West at that time, it was 86,000, it's probably bigger still now, from Ashley Ward, with one of the poorest communities, right up to Stoke Bishop, which was probably the wealthiest, trying to bridge that and people together, trying to bring Bristol and Westminster together. And I also wanted to show you this because this was a different party at number 10. And there were differences with the Labour government, there is no doubt. And one of the examples I had was going to an event and there was a photographer there. And, you know, working out what was different. I hadn't been there before, so I didn't know what was potentially different, except that we were getting the vote through, and that was brilliant. But I was in an event, a social event with, you know, promoting something or other, one of the charities, no doubt. And I spoke to the photographer who was there, and he said, "Don't let anyone tell you that things haven't changed." He said, "You are the first member of Parliament. I've been coming into this house," he said, "for years as a photographer, an official photographer for this group. Nobody has spoken to me before." He said, "Things are changing. People are talking across the board to other people." And this event was because Cherie Blair was inviting 3 children from constituencies. Now, I don't think she could have done the whole lot. I think it may have been, it was cross-party, but I think it may have been new MPs. But she invited 3 children. We were to choose them. And I chose them from, we pinpointed 3 schools in different parts of the constituency. So we chose, I think it was almost a pinprick, Hotwell School, Westbury Park and Cabot. And we asked each of those schools to choose somebody to be part of this delegation of children from Bristol West. And they came to London, they had a great day in London. I took them around the Commons. They went into number 10 for tea. We had a tea party with children. I think there were 10 MPs and 30 children, something like that. And I think I've just got time. Yes, I've just got time to tell you what happened. I've got one more object to tell you, but I must just tell you what happened. These three youngsters, I said to them, look, Cherie will come around to each group of us and you must have a question ready. So we arranged the question that each of them would ask Cherie, and she was just finishing. My three were brilliant. They were lovely youngsters. They just finished and something, oh, there's a buzz. Tony's here, Tony's coming. I said, right, three more questions. And one of my youngsters already had said to me, he'd seen the fireplace at the end of this huge room. He said, what happens, Valerie, if I press that button or I pull that button? I said, don't. I just said to him, don't. Well, we hadn't quite got our questions ready when Tony came round. So when Tony came round, you can imagine what this boy asked. He said, what happens, sir, if I pull the bell? And Tony, bless him, said, I think we better go and find out, don't you? Let's go and pull it and see what happens. So we went to the edge of the room, and of course nothing happened, but he was able to explain to him what would have happened in the past. And these youngsters, I'm sure, along with all the other youngsters and all the other people, Commonwealth students, visitors from Bristol West, a whole range of people that we were able to get into Parliament, won't forget it. And I trust will realise that politics is something they too can get involved in. So that time, as you realise, and we were thinking especially today of what's happening, was momentous for the Iraq war. And I'll happily talk about that if you want me to. I voted against going to war, but I'll happily talk to you about that situation if you'd like me to. One of the other wars that I was particularly concerned about was the war in northern Uganda, the one where children were being used, the Lord's Resistance Army. And with my links with East Africa, and I went back to Tanzania twice as an MP, but Uganda and the Lord's Resistance Army. And I can remember doing a German debate. And the moment I remember was not the debate. I was passionate about we hadn't done enough and we got to stop this war, which was using children. 20,000 children had disappeared in northern Uganda. The army was 11 to 15-year-olds. It was horrendous. And I came out and I saw the buses going around Parliament Square. Nothing was going to change. And I can see myself staring at those buses now. Why hasn't the world stopped? And I'm feeling it today. Why hasn't the world stopped with the invasion of Ukraine? What have we done? Why are we not doing so much more? So I could tell you amazing things. I did go to, I was meant to go with a colleague to a women's conference in Gaza, and we weren't able to get to Gaza in the end, but we went to Jerusalem, and I could tell you a whole range about that. And then, of course, I lost my seat in '95, and again, you know, what happens then? Well, what happens then, I want to spend just a few moments with my last object, which is this. This is 2018. This is the suffragette badge, which I was given when in 2018, I went back to Parliament, to Westminster Hall, to celebrate 100 years of women getting the vote. Not all women. We haven't yet got to the 100th anniversary of women getting the vote on equal terms. But in 2018, we were celebrating women of 30 and with a residential qualification getting a vote. But I was celebrating something else. When I look back at the staff in my office, 3 of them had become councillors. One in Plymouth, one in Cardiff, and one in Leeds. And one of them had become an MP. And all of them are women. And that influence, that gradual influence of women, and I think if women were in more influential positions right across, then things would change. But I celebrated that, and I celebrated what they have been able to do and what that office has moved forward. And I'm not saying that some of the men who I was able to have in the office haven't done great things as well. But for this celebration is the fact that women came forward, and I still can't think of it. And you can see on your screen now a woman who was one, and I can't still believe it, and I find it hard to say. I was one, when I went to Parliament, of only 239 women who had ever been British MPs. 239. That's the, some of them have been re-elected, but different. 239 is up to about 240, 250 something now. But I can't believe that when I think about it. And I did it through encouragement. I did it through people encouraging me. And what I want to say to you this morning is, politics is hugely important, and you all know that. Women in politics, we're coming up slowly. They need encouragement. I needed encouragement. But actually, it's about not what the individual does. It's about what we all do together in parties, in groups, to influence for the better. So I spent more than my time. I'm going to stop there because I'm sure there are other things that other Labour Party members in this group might want to say, and other people might want to contribute. So let me stop there. That's a whistle-stop tour through my experience of politics, and I could spend so much longer. But that's the outline, and please, please discuss and please ask anything you'd like to.
Okay, thanks. That's thank you, Valerie. And questions and comments? Well, I shall go first because I have two questions and one of them is rather controversial. So I'll start with if we've got time for that, I shall make that one. But this one is a more interesting one. Lots of MPs now who are coming to be MPs have said that their career is to be an MP. I disagree with that quite a lot because this makes rather middle class type of thing to say, I believe. But where these days are the MPs who were of a working class type of thing, of the miners, of the basically the working class, which have been, they're not there anymore. And I think that is sad for our government.
No, I agree. Well, as you saw, it wasn't only my career. I had no idea. I was just encouraged each step of the way. The idea of becoming an MP had never crossed my mind. I can honestly say, being a councillor, being an Avon councillor, was an amazing thing to be. And I agree with you that we need in Parliament, we had on Avon, as I tried to indicate, a huge range of people from a wide background who had this conviction about the fact that together we could do more than as individuals, and had a concern, for working people and so on. And we did have the miner, we had the docker, and we had the engine driver, and so on. And I think that does reflect something very special for the Labour Party. How are we going to do it now, Ray? I don't know, because the background has become so much more narrow, and it's become so much more difficult. I think we have to see a resurgence, certainly of trade union activity. I think we have to see a resurgence within Labour constituencies. And I think we have to be much more conscious in our selection of MPs. And this idea that you can, go to Eton and move on, we've tried to copy, I think, almost. And it won't work, and it doesn't work, certainly not for us in the Labour Party. We need that broad spectrum. I mean, what I didn't say, perhaps I put on my note, was that Avon took on people like me, you know, as housewives and mothers. So there's that huge spectrum, and that's what we need. But no, I agree with you entirely. We don't need we don't need people who have said to themselves, I'm going to Parliament, that's my destiny. No, not at all.
Marion.
Do you think that we are destined to have a Conservative government forever? Because we've lost all the Labour MPs in Scotland, and the Tories seem to have won over some very unlikely people in the north of England.
It has crossed my mind, Marion, yes. And not only that, but the new legislation going through, which demands a photo identity for voting and things like that, all are making life much more difficult for people to even vote. So I think there is a huge pressure. And the reorganisation of the constituencies, if that comes about in 24, before the next general election as well, bodes very badly for us. It's going to be very, very hard. And I think, and it's difficult to say it because I was very determined when Avon went hung that we didn't have a coalition, but I have learnt from being hung the values of a collaborative coalition, a collaborative hung council, I mean, not a coalition. I think we need to be looking across the board, and where we've got other people who will be more sympathetic to us than the Tories, we have to work with them. And it may be that we get a hung parliament, but a hung parliament is rather different. I'm not sure that we've got the prowess yet to work, and I don't think we could work potentially a hung parliament. We'd go to another general election, wouldn't we? So I think your comment and your expression of a danger is a nightmare, quite honestly. It's something which I have thought I can't try and push from my mind, but it is something where all of us are going to have, those of us in the Labour Party are going to have to work exceptionally hard to ensure that we promote those values as expressed, as I say, on the back of our membership cards, and are working very hard. But the very practical problems of Scotland and of North of England and of the new boundary commission results and of new legislation for, so say, protecting us from fraud at elections is going to make life very, very difficult. Not an easy answer.
What are the constituency changes? I mean, I know about the voting things, and I think they're just a cover for increasing the Tory vote.
Well, I haven't got all the details of it, Marilyn, but it's horrifying because they want to average out the numbers per constituency. So, for example, as I said to you, when I went to Parliament in '97, Bristol West was up amongst the handful of the largest number. So I had 86,000, and other people had that. They tried to bring them down. They will look at evening out, which means that there will be more, just to put it crudely, there'll be more rural constituencies and fewer urban, because they will, push them out. So the difficulty we're going to face, and I think we've reckoned, I don't know what the figures are, and I haven't got them to hand, but we will certainly lose. We will lose out if you do it on a mathematical basis. We will lose seats in that new arrangement. But I'm sorry, Marion, I haven't got the details.
No, I don't understand how evening out the numbers means that you'll have more rural ones, because surely the population is much.
Yeah, you're quite right, Marion. I shouldn't have made that generalisation. You're quite right. But the way in which it will work certainly will be, let me just say it quite simply, the way in which it will work will be detrimental to the Labour Party. And I think that's why it's being done, potentially in the way it's being done.
But has there not been any opposition to the voting thing?
Yes, there has, yes.
And
there
is that
is.
likely to have any sway? Because it seems like it's going to disenfranchise whole heaps of people that don't have particular documents.
Either yesterday or the day before, Marion, it was debated in the Lords, and certainly there was opposition there, but of course the Lords won't have the final say, the Commons will. And I don't even know whether they got the vote through in the Lords. There is opposition to it, but I think it'll go through.
It's all pretty sad, really.
It's very sad.
Sure.
Yeah, I just want to gently disagree with you, Ray. Our present Bristol West Labour MP came into Parliament through the trade union movement. That it was the musicians' union, I agree, is unusual, but I think that's pretty much Bristol West. And I think Darren Jones, the Bristol Northwest, grew up in a council flat with a single mum. So, you know, anyway, in Bristol, I know you can make generalizations. And I think, you know, I think it's important who is selected, but I think we don't do too badly in Bristol.
Thank you, Angela.
David?
Yeah, thank you. A couple of points which I'll try and make overlap, and it's about political action. We're in an interesting situation in Bristol now with sort of a hung council with an equal number of Greens and Labour, and that to me raises the question of whether we want to, you know, electoral reform, you know, because I was talking to the independents who won in Frome, and they said that they were actually a watermelon party because they were red on the inside and green on the outside. And they got in as independents, but their politics was very much a mix of green and socialism. And I'm wondering if we can't head towards that. But the other piece, well, and I stood as a parliamentary candidate for the Natural Law Party in 1992, partly as an, well, it was a really interesting circumstance, but the people were told it was a choice between two evils, and the meditation movement that I was involved in decided we'd have a crack at it. And there's a massive learning from the idea of going to a deeper democracy. One of the platforms was to not have parties, but to have people in the local constituencies be organised in interest groups like around health, education, welfare, defence, and so on, to be organising our own things. So you'd bring together the people and the councillors and the policy makers, the policy deliverers, and the people running the schools, rather than have a big loop where, you know, you try and adjust it here and you end up having no effect. Let's have everybody who's involved in a group. And this is kind of where I've let myself, so I'm much more involved now directly with renewable energy because I'm interested in climate change. And I think I would be very, very frustrated if I was trying to adjust the levers of government, even though Extinction Rebellion exists. And even though Bristol has had a citizens' assembly about what to do, that's actually been kind of just put on a shelf as a consultative document. And if anything does happen, it will be, I think, in the constituencies starting to do what they need to do for themselves, community action, in other words. And I just wonder, so there's a bit of a rigmarole there, but I wonder if you see any kind of shift towards much, not just participative democracy, but in terms of decision making, but in terms of implementation as well.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I certainly belong to the Labour campaign for electoral reform, I think, and I have done for decades. It's something which I think we should bring forward. And I was disappointed we didn't earlier. I think there has to be a wider variety and a collaboration. One of the things I learnt in going to Parliament, that if you stand on the line, the line either side of the seats in the House of Commons, to toe the line comes from Parliament. And you toe the line if you put your toes there, and if you stay there, your sword doesn't reach the other side. And that's the nature of that phrase. Now, that confrontational style in Parliament, you know, it comes from the Oxford debating chamber, it comes from afar, but it's not good for our democracy. Just right there in the heart of Parliament. And I was delighted when I went to Dodoma, Tanzania. I was doing, the British Council arranged for an exchange between myself and a woman Tanzanian MP. You go into the Tanzanian Parliament and it's in a semicircle. And as you speak, there is one lectern, and it's got some British tradition there. There is a speaker, and so on, but there is a lectern, and each speaker goes to the lectern. So you're not in this confrontational setup. And I think we've got a lot to learn from that. We've also got to, I think you're quite right, have this, I like the idea of people, citizen groups, the fact that Southern Ireland got its vote through on help me someone. Southern Ireland had this wonderful
abortion reform.
Thank you. Yes, that certainly delighted me. I think we've got to have much more access and much more involvement. If people don't think it's worth voting, then why would they vote? If they haven't got direct access, and I think that's why I showed you the picture of the children. Really, if I tried to have as much access with ordinary people, and I say ordinary, that's wrong, with people of Bristol West, to take there and reflect back. And the nature of those discussions is crucial. Now, can I see ways forward at the moment? Not a lot. I mean, I can see it happening, and I can see campaigns happening for certain things. In Knoll, for example, at the moment, we're really worried about a new development at our shopping centre. We're worried about a mast being set up in the park, all the usual things that happen. And suddenly those communities of people across the board come together. And I certainly learned a huge amount from Hung Avon. It can be done in local politics. We didn't do it by collaborating. At one stage, it was a Tory, a Liberal Democrat coalition for a budget, and they didn't like that either. It didn't work. So we all kept our individual roles. We all went to officers at the same time for briefings, and then we put forward our different policies. And that worked. I mean, the huge respect I have for people in different parties as a result of that. You had to win the argument. You had to be there. It was very hard work. It wasn't for the faint-hearted. It was hard work. And I very cynically, I'm afraid, perhaps said, when it got to that stage, there were 3 women leaders on Avon. It was the women who were doing that hard work, I have to say. But it was hard work, but it was very good hard work. So potentially, I think, David, I want to see it, and any other experience you've got and can bring it together, because I think that, I mean, that reflected, let's be fair, that Hung Council reflected Avon. You know, that was how Avon politically, with its wide brief, came to form. So the answer is, I haven't got an answer, but I think it will come. I think it's got to come. And any experience you've got to share, then bring it forward.
Two things, very much shorter than my first bit. I am actually chair of SERA, the Socialist Environmental Resource Association in Bristol, Southwest, which gives me a little bit of a clout putting together ideas around renewable energy and so on. The most mileage I'm getting at the moment, because I've done project work in Lockleys, is working with the 2 Green councillors in Lockleys, because they're interested to see policy changes in the Green Party, and I'm able to affect policy in the Green Party from zero better than I can within Labour at the moment. And I just find that's the point, you know, that of being open and seeing what's possible. I also think technology has an effect, and I think we'll see a dramatic shift in the potential of our democracy in the next 10 years because of artificial intelligence, which will change everything about the way that we communicate. Which will, I think, will be quite interesting, but that's probably a topic for another day.
Yeah, but if that can be used for the good, I'm finding Zoom ward meetings quite frustrating at the moment. I'm not able to, with 9 of us here, that's brilliant. With, you know, more than that, then having that personal dialogue, which you would have had in a ward meeting, I'm finding quite difficult.
Mm.
I'm going to ask a slightly, well, not slightly, it's kind of controversial take at the moment, which it felt for me, but felt very passionate with me at the time. I was one of over 1 million people who went to London to protest against the Iraq war. There were huge amounts there. We also all went back to our MPs and said, we think we want you to vote against this. And at the time, I was part of the constituency which Jean Causton was, being a MP for enormously long time. And I know from the majority of her constituents said, we want you to vote against. She didn't, of course, but that was, I believe, a very sorry day for anyone who was a socialist, anyone who was in the Labour Party at the time, because they failed us. Us as ordinary members were failed by our own party.
Ray, I sympathise. As you know, I did vote against. My Bristol West constituency was also very vocal, but from my own background and my own situation, I voted against. The one thing which I still remember, and which almost, no, it didn't almost persuade me, but made me see the other side, was on the evening before one of those votes, there were 2 votes, was hearing the leader of the Kurdish Iraqis who came to Westminster and spoke to us. And he was brought by Anne Clwyd. Now, Anne Clwyd, a Welsh MP, she's since died, but an amazing socialist from South Wales. And she was our envoy to Iraq. Blair chose some very good women to do different things. Claire Short went to Afghanistan and helped with women's development. Mo Molan went to Northern Ireland and went into the maze. Anne Clwyd was our link, one of our links with Iraq. And she brought to the House the leader of the Iraqi Kurds. And he said, please, please take action. We have been fighting against, saying for 20 years, Jalalabad, chemicals were used against my people. It is possible. And if you heard the passion of that man the night before that vote, then it wasn't easy, I can tell you. He was looking to Blair to join the Americans to invade, because that's all he could see as the way forward for the Iraqi Kurds. Now, that wasn't the whole story, of course, but it was a passionate speech. And when we came to those speeches in the House, people were passionate. It was a difficult time. But I know what you're saying. What I had said to quite a few of those people on the march was that it was important that they went back. When some MPs could genuinely say that their mailbag wasn't full of letters. it really was important. That's how democracy works. The march itself was brilliant to show Iraq and others, and to show other people how passionately we felt. But it, as you saw, it didn't change the vote. Going back as you did, didn't even change the vote there, which I'm sorry for. I'm really sorry about. But that was where it had to be. Democracy works layer by layer. It's this subsidiarity of how it works. And it's a difficult path to tread, as David was saying earlier. You have to find your way up that scale as well as down it. The one thing as well, I would say, is that we took a petition of about 50 of us who were anti the war, went to see Blair. We didn't all go, but it was our delegation, as it were. And we had three requests. One, that there was no preemptive strike in Iraq. B, that there would be no attack before the United Nations had given its agreement. And thirdly, that there would be a debate in the House. And the one thing we got out of that, if you like, was the debate. And to be fair, well, can't be fair really, but that was the first time that going to war was ever discussed in the Commons. Up till then, it was a Prime Minister's prerogative. It had never been debated before that. And now I think you could never do it without coming to Parliament. So that changed, but it didn't stop the attack. It didn't stop us going to war. And I'm really sorry. That's all I can say, I think. The other thing that I do remember is I went to Cotton Parish Church. They invited me to come and speak. And the one thing that needed to come out, I felt, was that what we needed to do was strengthen the United Nations. It was really important that we went, and we haven't done that either. We haven't got further in strengthening a peacekeeping force. I mean, last night I was thinking, where are the blue hats going into Ukraine? Where are the blue hats? You know, why haven't we got a peacekeeping force keeping the peace between the Russians and the Ukrainians at the moment? You know, we ought to be putting all our, I mean, I'd have all our troops as blue caps, you know, they all ought to be under the United Nations. We haven't strengthened the United Nations, but that was what came out of it for me, that really we had, and again, there was a debate in the Commons, which I spoke in, about strengthening the role of the United Nations. No, it's a sad situation, and today I can hardly talk about it. It's just awful.
Any more questions or comments, friends?
Well, just on that topical point, sorry, just on that topical point, I wonder if the outcome of this, seeing on social media the shame and embarrassment of Russian people, that their dictator can have a war on his own. I hope that the outcome of this will be a shift in the politics of Russia eventually. Obviously not going to happen overnight, but you know, the world is looking aghast at this, I think. And you know, something's got to change. And the blatant issuing of a nuclear threat, if anybody was to set foot on Ukraine, seems, you know, so I just wonder if you've got what your personal thoughts are on this, Valerie.
Well, I think one of the saddest things is to know that over the thousands of protesters in Moscow and all the cities have been arrested. You know, if you demonstrated in London, you can do it, at least that. But these protesters have all been arrested in Russia at the moment. It's just horrific. I don't think Putin has a shame button to press. But I do think that eventually things will change, but it's going to take a long time. And how many thousands of people would have died, and how many repercussions of that will come to the surface. I mean, what I learned about going to Israel-Palestine was to realize the depth that it takes generations to outlive the angst, the pain of the conflict, the Israel-Palestine conflict. It was a huge eye-opener to me to go Palestine, Israel. And again, I have to say, it was the women on both sides. And they said to me, Valerie, when you go back, tell them what you've seen, but don't say don't differentiate between witches and angels. Even in our case, you know, the women, we're not. We've all got faults on both sides, but peace has got to come. We've got to work together. We've just got to work together and understand. And I think looking back, and you know, as I've done in preparation for this, the privilege I've had is been of working with people on both sides, of seeing both points of view, of sticking firm eventually to where I am. I'm not going to leave the Labour Party because that's where my core values still are. But being able to work within and without, and seeing these different people, I think we've all got to do it. We've all got to be those diplomats. In my maiden speech, I said, if we could breach the gap between the people and help the people of Slade Park understand Ashley and Ashley and Slade Park, we could be diplomats around the world. You know, we've got to do it locally as well as nationally, and as well as within our parties and within our, I'm not privy to Quaker politics, but I know about Methodist politics, you know? We've got to be the peacemakers, haven't we? We've got to be the people in our own communities, in our own areas, to build up as well as to have come down. So where's
Well, friends,
is Marion still with us? No.
friends, I think the time has caught up with us again. We are, but it's far too soon. But thank you, Valerie, for a very interesting and challenging conversation which we had had.
Thank you for having me.
We will no doubt see you all. Hopefully, we'll see you all again. And my usual requests from Patsy: what are we doing next week?
Patsy,
You're
you're
muted there.
Sorry, we've got Julia back. She's been sent lots of questions from us on questions about gender, and Julia is our gender expert, for want of a better phrase, from UCL, and she'll be here next week with the questions we've sent in. There may also be time for more questions, so if people would like to, if you haven't sent a question to Julia and you'd like to, you've got time to do so this week. Thank you. Thank you very much.